Are you ready for the ultimate story of swords and sorcery? And also a story illustrating why the Bernie Sanders, let's just help people way of thinking will always end in blood and betrayal? Well, we got the movie for you in today's episode of The Bomb Squad. This is the second entry. This is a third entry. I didn't count Night Riders because it's so terrible. This is a third entry in our medieval movie, week, month, whatever. And Josh, tell us the movie and describe the plot.
The movie is Excalibur. It is the life and times of King Arthur.
It's directed by John Borman. It stars Nigel Terry as King Arthur. It stars Helen Mirren as Morgana. It was like a lot of people's first movie, like Patrick Stewart, Liam Neeson, which is cool. Like, it's cool, and it's cool to see them in a role where they're not, like, treated as stars, because, like, Liam Neeson and Patrick Stewart just, like, end up dying off screen, and you never even see them. But
Yeah, that was cool the way that Patrick Stewart kind of plays against type, because I think ever since Star Trek, he's played kind of an intellectual, even if it's like a joke, you know, he's still kind of the sophisticated British man, but in this he's like the loud, brash, like dumbass, you know? It was cool to see him like totally like different.
There's so much of this movie that shouldn't work because it does tell the story of King Arthur from conception to death. And so like it is just kind of hopping around scenes. Like it gives it a kind of real life feel to it where like, you know how sometimes you have friends and they disappear not because you hate them or you had a falling out, but just because life went on and you kind of moved on. And that's kind of how a lot of this feels, where it's like, oh, where's Patrick Stewart, Guinevere's dad? It's like, well, it's been like 40 years. I think he's dead.
It kind of rushes through it, but in a way where it's like, you'll get it. Like it's like the movie trusts you to figure out what's going on, just like as the scene unfolds, without like giving you a big introduction, which is, I don't know. I liked it.
Gabriel Bryan plays Uther Pendragon, and at the very beginning they're at war, and then Merlin comes out and he's like, I believe that you're gonna be a good leader. Here's Excalibur for you to take.
Behold! The sword of power! Excalibur!
I have Excalibur now, I can't lose, we should come to peace.
Like Merlin is there helping him, but he's like, Why do I have to give you anything? I'm the king. And Merlin's like, hey, maybe don't start a war immediately. He's like, fine.
Yeah.
I guess you can have these lands. Yeah.
Speaking of which, then they immediately like have a party, and then the guy, the bad king, is like, hey, check out my hot wife. She's going to dance. And she starts dancing. And then Pendragon's like, oh, let's go to war because I want to have sex with the wife. Merlin's like, okay, I'm going to make you look like the husband while the husband's at war, so you can go have sex with her. And he does. And then Merlin's like, I want the baby. And that's Arthur. And then Merlin takes the baby. And then Pendragon like is chasing him because he wants the baby back. And then they ambush him. Also, the funniest thing happens in that scene because he's like riding away. And then all these knights attack him. Because he's lost their trust because of the wife fucking thing. And then they attack him and they pull him off the horse. And someone yells, ambush!
Ambush!
But it could only be like the people ambushing him who say it. It's like, why did you yell that out loud? We know what we're doing. Like, and they stab him, and then Pendragon, he takes the Excalibur and he throws it. No, he stabs it into the stone. It's the sword of the stone in this legend, and so nobody can take it. And Merlin's like, oh no, what have you done? And he like curses it real fast, so that only the King of England can take the sword from the stone. But, like, nobody told Pendragon to do that. He's such a petty asshole that he tried to stab a stone with a sword just so nobody else could have it, even though he's about to die. And he's not going to be king anymore. It's like, should I help? Should I help everyone else and let him have the sword of power, or should I stab it into a stone for bullshit reasons? And that's why I think that Uther Pendragon is the original Chad of history.
They even kind of like at the very beginning, the first thing you see in the movie is his like silhouette and armor, and he's like intentionally like demonic looking. Like
right.
it's like a demonic helmet, you know? It's a nice touch.
Oh yeah, and see, this is what I was talking about, is that like the knights in the movie, they always kind of feel realistic. Like after Arthur becomes the king, or well, even then, when Arthur becomes the king, he pulls the sword from the stone, and everyone's like freaking out, and they immediately go to war because they're like, "Oh, we're not gonna serve some squire that nobody knows." You know, he's like a little virgin.
Yeah, and they kind of like they imply too that after Uther died, things just went bad enough that like most knights are basically just like robbers and like bandits kind of.
Yeah, I kind of
Like one level above that.
Yeah, I kind of felt that like all the kind of tribes broke off into their own little sects and got their own castles. And so yeah, so Arthur has to like go stop them. And then like he gets in a fight with them and he gets the guy and he has him by the sword he has him like he's threatening him. And he's like, "Will you yield?" And then the guy's like, "No." And then he gives him the Excalibur and he says, "Then knight me, since you don't want to you have to serve a knight." And that like teaches that knight and Merlin that Arthur's different than everyone else.
Keep it, Urians! In the name of God, St. Michael and St. George, I give you the right to bear arms and the power to meet justice.
That duty I will solemnly obey, as knight and king.
I never saw this.
Which is a good character moment to see the difference between Arthur and
It's like he
Pendragon.
makes them be what they should have been the whole time, like what they kind of claim to be. Like he brings them to his level, but he's so like moved by like the honor that like that's what gets him to succeed. So it's nice. It's a good scene. I will say after this though, it gets a little hairy because they immediately make Arthur kind of an asshole.
Yeah, he like
And
that's
this is the scene where Lance, like he meets Lancelot and he confronts him, and it kind of goes from like, oh, he's this very even-handed, thoughtful man to like, oh, he is so angry, he's just gonna do anything he can to get this guy.
Yeah.
I do get it because Lancelot's kind of a dick. Like in the whole movie, he's unlikable, but it's a very abrupt change for Arthur's character, and that's where the movie's like kind of rushing along works against it a little bit.
And it is that thing that I was talking about with the life, how it feels like real life. Because yeah, it goes from Arthur like showing that he's noble and doesn't care about like he would rather gain people's trust than go to war with them, and he immediately like wants to kill Lancelot because Lancelot kind of embarrassed him a little bit. Like Lancelot has beat all his knights,
but only in this scene too. We like, and I think that's what makes this one scene stand out is that after this, he goes back to being that guy again. It's like he loses his temper once ever with Lancelot, and that's it. Because they even make a big deal that the sword breaks because he's so angry.
and that's when he realizes that you shouldn't just do things to be selfish, because he very clearly was like his pride had been hurt. Then he like helps Lancelot and makes him like his best friend.
And they even kind of rush through this scene because he goes like they do make a big deal of him breaking the sword, and he throws in the lake. He's like, England is ruined, and Merlin's like, there is no future. And then like literally a minute later, it's like, just kidding, the sword's fine. You learned your lesson, let's just move on.
Also,
you
and
know?
there's a scene in there that's also one of my favorite scenes. He tells Merlin, like, "Hey, you're gonna help me out," and Merlin's like trying to catch a fish. And keep in mind, up until this point, this movie has been filled with sex and betrayal and people's heads getting cut off. And Merlin's like trying to catch a fish, and then he catches one. He's like, and the fish jumps out of his hand, and he's like, "Remember, Arthur, someone will always be more clever than you." And then he falls into the water, and he even like shakes his hand like, "Whoa!" It's straight out of a Disney movie, and it doesn't fit the tone of the rest of this movie at all. But it makes me laugh so much.
That's like, because like for the rest of the movie, Merlin is like the guy who gives you extremely vague but serious like life-changing advice. And then he'll be like, gulp, and like slip on something.
That's why I like Merlin, because he's like, whoopsie daisy. Yeah, him falling in the water is so funny to me. I do think that is one of the things I like about it, is that the knights, unlike knight riders, the knights they're human. Even though King Arthur is literally destined to be the king of England, he's constantly like messing up or having like moments of doubt or just like having mistakes. that sometimes he has to go back on. Like at the end,
It's always a mistake where you can kind of see where he's coming from. Like the big pivotal thing that kind of messes up the Lancelot thing is like everyone kind of knows that Lancelot and the Queen are kind of looking at each other, you know, and nothing's happened at this point. But then Liam Neeson is the drunk knight Gawain who like finally says it out loud and is like, "You slut!" It's like, "Stop looking." and she's like, "Arthur, you have to defend my honor." He's like,
Will you not champion me?
I cannot! I'm your king, and I must be your judge in this.
and it's like, that makes sense legally, but also your wife hates you now because
he like obviously Lancelot and Guinevere hook up. He gets mad and he starts to go into a depression slide. Me and you both, Arthur. They go find the Holy Grail. They give it to him. He gets better, and he goes to see Guinevere, who's long like fled the castle because of her cheating ways. And Arthur like goes up to her and he tells her like, "Yeah, it was my fault as well because I cared more about ruling the kingdom than being a man, and I still have to do that. Like I still have to be king above being a man or being a husband." And Guinevere's like, "Well, fuck you, Arthur. Here's your sword back." But yeah, like Arthur is never seen as someone who can't make mistakes. It's always like, "Oh no, I can't because of my kingly duties," you know? And it's like, this is why am I fucking Lancelot every 5 seconds. This movie is very much about how men, even if they have the best of intentions, can be brought down by themselves because men are fallible, and they should be.
Ready my knights for battle. They will ride with their king once more. I've lived through others far too long. Lancelot carried my honor, and Guinevere my guilt. Mordred bore my sins. My knights have fought my causes. Now, my brother, I shall be king.
They almost kind of comment on like the nature of humanity, because once him and Lancelot become friends, and before it gets to like, you know, the cheating, there's kind of a big scene where the knights
Him
all
and
gather
Lancelot,
around,
don't you mean Bernie and Warren? This is a political podcast now.
Don't bring Elizabeth Ward into this. Anyway, no, there's a scene where they're all gathered around, and it's kind of the scene where it's like, "Oh, I'm going to build a table to commemorate how we're all standing in a circle." Yeah. And it's like the Knights of the Round Table, and it's this scene where they've essentially succeeded. Like, he's united England, everything's at peace, like the land is bountiful, and it's almost like, oh, everything is so good that these knights who've like made their name, like, you know, going to war and like conquesting, have like gotten bored, and that's why like courtly intrigue and cheating is happening. You know, it's like, oh, they're so successful they don't have anything better.
Yeah,
to do.
don't they?
And I was like, oh, that's kind of an interesting.
Don't they even
idea.
comment on that?
We have lost our way, Arthur.
It's not easy for them without the hard teaching of war and quest.
Yeah, they even say like, oh, my knights were made to go out raiding, but now there's nothing to do. You know, it's like kind of one
And
of those.
speaking of which, we all know what that feels like being in Corona times.
There's indeed nothing.
I feel like
to do.
accusing Benny and Leia of cheating, even though they're dogs and they're not legally married yet.
In Arthur, like the one kind of like the evil witch character, Morgana, she knows she's gonna have to like get around Merlin to take her revenge, and even then, she only traps him because he's about to kill her. Like, he knows she's like prophesied to do it. It's kind of a whole fate thing. So he's gonna trap her when all she does is turn the tables on him and trap him first. So it's like, it's believable evil, you know, in a sense.
Yeah, I think Morgana, who's like more interesting than any character I've mentioned so far, she's like her motivation makes sense. She wants to be the queen because she technically should have been the queen. Merlin knows that she's magical because she's like tells Merlin a couple of things that gives him illusion. So he starts training her because he wants her to like take over for him. And then he realizes that she's gone to the dark side. And that scene where they're like both of them are talking, but they're both lying to each other. And you don't know which one's like gonna come out ahead until Merlin gets stabbed in the back, literally. Is one of the best scenes in the movie, because even though I've seen this movie a bunch of times, I always forget exactly how that scene ends, and that Merlin's about to get himself trapped in a crystal ball. And it's just so good, like just the dialogue, the way they're talking about it, the Well, like, fact that you know both of their motivations and what they want to be saying and that they're not saying it. It's just a very interesting scene. But yeah, so that was Excalibur. I highly recommend it. It sometimes comes on streaming, but a lot of the times you have to rent it. But it's worth a rental. I think it's worth watching. Especially if you're interested in King Arthur's Tale, but you don't want to watch Ridley Scott or Guy Ritchie make up their own version that has nothing to do with any of the tale part. Watch this movie because it's the best. It's the best version of the story.
But overall, it's a good time. It's 2.5 hours, but unlike Knight Rider, it doesn't feel like it's 4.5 hours.
I just realized that we picked medieval movies. It's like, oh, these are famously long.
Yeah.
Well, too bad. Yeah. So next week, I think we're watching Kroll. Josh's pick Kroll.
Oh no.
So yeah. So come back for that. I don't think either of us have seen it, and we're about to find out whether it's even medieval or not. Stay tuned for a new deep dive as well, because that's coming up sometime this month. Who knows when? Yeah. All right. So that's it. Josh, do you have anything to say?
I hope Kroll is good.
I hope Kroll is cruel. But yeah, so come back next week when we talk about Kroll, and we'll see you guys on the flip side.